a matter of minutes, a peaceful 1,400-acre lake transformed into one of the strangest engineering disasters in human history. The water began spinning. At first, it looked like a harmless current. Then, the current became a whirlpool. Then, the whirlpool became a monster. A giant vortex, hundreds of feet wide, opened in the center of Lake Peigneur, swallowing everything unlucky enough to be nearby. 11 massive barges were dragged into the spinning abyss. Trees were ripped from the shoreline. Millions of gallons of water rushed downward with unstoppable force. And then something even more unbelievable happened. The flow of an entire canal reversed direction. The normally calm waterway suddenly became a 150-foot waterfall as the Gulf of Mexico began pouring backward into the collapsing lake. A lake had turned into a drain, and at the center of it all was a single mistake. A mistake made by a drill bit only 14 inches wide. But perhaps the most shocking part of this disaster is what happened next. Because beneath that collapsing lake, 55 workers were trapped underground inside a salt mine, hundreds of feet below the surface. The walls around them were beginning to fail. The darkness was filling with rushing water. Their only escape route was disappearing. And somehow, against every possible expectation, every single person survived. No one died. Not one person. A disaster powerful enough to erase a lake had somehow produced a miracle. But to understand how this happened, we have to go back to the beginning, before the whirlpool, before the flooding, before Lake Peigneur vanished into the earth. Because the disaster started with a simple calculation that was off by just a few feet. Lake Peigneur was not just another lake. Located near New Iberia, Louisiana, it was part of a landscape shaped by two very different worlds. Above the surface, there was nature, a beautiful freshwater lake surrounded by wetlands and wildlife. But below the surface, there was something far more valuable, a hidden underground world made of salt. For millions of years, ancient oceans had evaporated and left behind enormous deposits of salt beneath Louisiana. And in the years before the disaster, the Diamond Crystal Salt Company operated a massive underground mine directly beneath Lake Peigneur. Hundreds of feet below the water, miners carved enormous chambers through solid salt. Above them, life continued normally. Boats crossed the lake. Wildlife moved through the wetlands. But in 1980, another company arrived, a company looking for something completely different. Oil. Texaco, one of America's largest energy companies, believed there might be oil reserves beneath Lake Peigneur. Their plan was simple. Send a drilling rig onto the lake, lower a drill deep into the earth, and search for oil. The operation was routine. The engineers had maps, measurements, and decades of experience. But there was one problem. Their information was wrong. The drilling team was using coordinate data to position their rig. But somewhere during the planning process, a critical error occurred. The location measurements did not match the actual position of the salt mine below. The difference was small, only a few feet. But underground, a few feet can mean the difference between solid ground and an empty cavern. On November 20th, 1980, the Texaco drilling crew began their operation. The drill pushed downward through mud and rock until finally the drill bit reached a depth of around 1,500 feet, and suddenly the 14-inch drill entered a giant underground hollow space, a chamber carved out by the salt mine. At that exact moment, the disaster was already in motion, because the drill had not simply made a hole, it had opened a doorway. water and salt do not mix well, or rather, they mix too well. When fresh water from Lake Peigneur entered the salt mine, it triggered a massive chemical chain reaction. Salt dissolves in water. A chain reaction had started that nobody could stop. A 14-inch hole did not stay 14 inches for long. As the lake water rushed downward, it began rapidly melting the solid salt walls around the drill pipe. The hole expanded. 14 inches became 3 feet. 3 feet became 10 feet. 10 feet became a cavernous chasm. On the surface, the drill crew on the Texaco rig knew something was horribly wrong. The rig began to tilt. Loud popping sounds echoed across the water as steel cables snapped under immense strain. Realizing the platform was about to collapse, the crew abandoned the rig and scrambled onto emergency boats. Just minutes later, the entire multi-million-dollar drilling platform tilted sideways and plunged beneath the surface. It didn't just sink, it vanished into the vortex. What started as a small leak on the lake floor had become a monster. A whirlpool hundreds of feet wide was now spinning at the center of Lake Peigneur. The suction was unimaginable. 11 massive steel barges carrying soil and equipment were dragged toward the center like toys in a bathtub. One by one, they were sucked beneath the water. A nearby botanical garden was torn apart as entire acres of land crumbled into the lake. Houses, trailers, and giant oak trees were swallowed whole. And then, the lake ran out of water. Lake Peigneur was literally emptying itself into the earth. The water level dropped so fast that the canal connecting the lake to the ocean reversed its direction, creating a temporary 150-foot waterfall. As the ocean water poured backward into the pit, geysers of air and compressed mud shot hundreds of feet into the sky from the flooded mine shafts. While the surface was turning into a vortex, 55 miners were working deep inside the salt mine, 1,500 feet below the lake floor. They had no idea a drill bit had pierced their ceiling until red emergency lights began flashing through the salt caverns. An electrician on the 1,300-foot level was the first to see it. A wall of muddy water came roaring around a corner, filling the tunnel with blinding speed. The alarm sounded across the entire underground complex. Panic set in. The power failed, plunging miles of salt tunnels into pitch-black darkness. The miners raced toward the primary escape shaft on small electric carts. Water was rising to their knees, then to their waists. Air pressure in the tunnels was building rapidly, creating deafening sonic booms as trapped air blew out through ventilation shafts. Their only way out was a slow, 8-person elevator hoist. 55 men needed to get up a 1,500-foot shaft, 8 people at a time. It was a race against extinction. Mine supervisors kept their composure, organizing the men into groups. The elevator made trip after trip, up into the light, then back down into the drowning dark. As the last group stepped into the cage, the salt pillars around them dissolved completely. The entire mine collapsed behind them. When the elevator reached the surface, the supervisors counted heads. 55 men had gone down that morning. 55 men stood on the surface. Against every law of probability, against physics, every single miner survived. 0 fatalities. The next morning, the roar had stopped. Lake Peigneur was unrecognizable. What had once been a shallow, 10-foot deep freshwater lake was now a 200-foot deep saltwater bay. 9 of the 11 submerged barges eventually popped back up to the surface like corks. The diamond crystal salt mine was permanently destroyed, buried under billions of gallons of water. Lawsuits immediately followed. Texaco and its drilling contractors paid over $45 million in out-of-court settlements. It became a classic case study in engineering textbooks around the world. Today, Lake Peigneur looks peaceful again. Boats sail across its surface. Most people driving past have no idea that deep beneath those calm waters lies a drowned world, a giant salt mine, an oil rig, and two barges that were never recovered. It serves as a stark reminder of human vulnerability. We build giant structures, we drill miles into the earth, but all it takes is a single 14-inch mistake for nature to reclaim it all. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of human engineering and survival. What disaster should we cover next? Let us know in the comments below.